Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. How much do you know about hydrogen? Well, I don't know very much about hydrogen. So I think it's time for me to get caught up. And I have two friends here who are going to tell me everything anybody would ever need to know about hydrogen. No, everything I am likely to need to know about hydrogen. They know a lot more. So I'm glad to have an opportunity to find out a little bit about what I have been missing all these years when it comes to hydrogen. Okay, we have in Vancouver, we have Michael Barnard, who's become a regular here. Oh, bless his heart, he is smart. It's really good to catch him. He is a deep tech and clean tech analyst and strategist in Vancouver, with who's very interesting background. And he has invited his friend by internet. They apparently never met in person, but they've been talking a lot. Paul Martin, who's a chemical engineer here in Toronto, who has been working with hydrogen for 30 years. So I feel very comfortable since he has survived all these 30 years and looks healthy to me. Good morning, fellas. How are you?
Doing
Excellent,
well.
Good.
And Paul, pleasure to actually finally speak to you in person.
Absolutely. We have been complimenting each other's articles for years.
It does seem that way.
It certainly does.
So I've got connections peripherally to both these companies. They're not bad companies. They just happen to exist in Alberta. They're Alberta-based companies, and they're doing what Alberta-based companies in the oil and gas industry it's in their best interest right now. Unfortunately, that's not in the best interest of anybody else.
Yeah, that's a way to put it. Hydrogen is really important. We use an awful lot of it. We use about 120 million tons of this stuff a year in the world between hydrogen and syngas. And right now, 98.5% of it, bare minimum, is made from fossil fuels without capturing any of the carbon. Not because we don't know how to make hydrogen without making CO2 or other emissions, but because we don't want to, because it's expensive. And it's not just expensive, it's very, very expensive. So so right now we don't waste hydrogen as a fuel. It's too precious to waste as a fuel because it's a fuel made from another fuel with losses.
Yeah, and let's just talk about this chart very briefly. This shows where hydrogen goes. For a long time, it was ammonia. The vast majority of hydrogen was consumed in ammonia and at ammonia manufacturing plants that then turned it into fertilizer. They made it on site by burning coal, by gasifying coal, or using steam reformation of natural gas. As time went by, though, kind of look at what's happening.
Wait a minute, hold on. This ammonia, the almost the sole use for it is as fertilizer. Is that right? Unless you want to blow up a building someplace with fertilizer.
Yeah, you make ammonia to make fertilizers from, and you also use ammonia as a fertilizer.
Yeah,
but that's what they blew up that Oklahoma City building with, right?
Well, that was a fertilizer bomb.
Yeah, ammonium nitrate. But so all the nitrates that we make in the world that we use as fertilizers are made from ammonia in the first place, and ammonium nitrate is just a way to make a molecule with a lot of nitrogen in it that you can get into the soil really easily.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you don't have to plant clover and let fields go fallow for a year.
Exactly.
But this is an interesting chart to draw extend what Paul was saying. 55% of the hydrogen that's manufactured today is used in petroleum refineries.
Mm-hmm.
It's used in petroleum processing, and that Suncor Atco thing announcement is a Fort Saskatchewan, Northern Alberta facility to do steam reformation of natural gas into hydrogen to use in the refineries up there. So it's not actually producing hydrogen for the purpose of, decarbonizing ammonia. It's for extending the value proposition of the fossil fuel industry, which is going to go away. So if 55% of hydrogen is used in petroleum refining, we're going to have about 20% of that industry remaining for the valuable chemical feedstocks in 4 decades. But that's a shrinking market. As opposed to being the growth market over the past 30 years, it's going to be a shrinking market. I mean, ammonia-based fertilizers, we over-fertilizer because we use high tillage agricultural techniques. Meta, you and I spoke about that last week or the week before, and you've spoken to other experts on that. High tillage agriculture approaches require more fertilizers, more pesticides, more herbicides. So we actually project with the expected application of low tillage agriculture globally, potential diminution of the ammonia-based fertilizer market as well.
And that's a good thing, because the way that we use ammonia right now as a fertilizer produces a lot of nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide, aside from being, kind of amusing as an intoxicant down here on Earth, when it's in the atmosphere, it is a really dangerous thing, because it's a very persistent and very effective greenhouse gas, 300 times CO2 or something like that.
Yeah, it's part of the problem with airline emissions, is that they're emitting nitrous oxides as a process of burning kerosene in the jet engines. And so we end up with this high potency greenhouse gas emissions in addition to the CO2 emissions from airlines.
And they stick around in the atmosphere for a long time. Some of the some of the nitrogen oxides are quite soluble in water and they're fine, but nitrous oxide isn't, and it's very persistent. It sticks around for a long time.
Well, how come we don't hear about that? They only talk about CO2, and I think, I keep finding out there are other awful things that are even worse.
And methane. I mean, we do talk about methane a lot too.
I'm very aware of methane these days, but I have heard of nitrous oxide, but it's not a major thing in my mental landscape. No.
Well, we're kind of hand-wringing about it, I would say, Meta, because we depend on these nitrogen fertilizers to live. I mean, literally. We can use less of them by being more efficient about how we use them, but we depend on them to live. About half of the protein, the nitrogen in the protein in our bodies, has been made by the Haber-Bosch process, which is the process by which we make ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen. Okay. Yeah, half of it. We're a bigger.
This chemical plant, the hybrid, whatever this name is, makes stuff that accounts for a good part of the protein in my body.
Half of the nitrogen that's in the protein in your body came from Haber-Bosch. We are a bigger cycle. We're a bigger part. We humans are a bigger part of the nitrogen cycle than nature is anymore. We're about 50-50, round numbers, 50-50.
Yeah.
Now on the carbon cycle, we're a trivial fraction of the carbon cycle. The problem is that we're adding CO2 in large amounts every single year, and we're taking it from reservoirs from where it's been stored for millions of years, and we're taking millions of years worth and dumping them back into the atmosphere every decade. So the carbon cycle is a big problem, but the nitrogen cycle, again, we depend on it for living. So we better solve this ammonia problem.
Is it cycling? We get it, we use it, and then we put it back out, or are we ripping it out of the underground? And then
nitrogen is actually really easy, because the atmosphere is made up, enormous percentage of the atmosphere is nitrogen. So when an ammonia plant makes ammonia, they take hydrogen from fossil fuels and ammonia just from the air, and then they make nitrous oxides.
But it's the oxide version that is so bad that we don't want to have out there, right? The nitrogen is fine.
That's part of it. But the other part of it is that in order to make the hydrogen, which is what we're kind of, here to begin talking about, you have to make that from something. And largely right now, 98.5% of it is made from fossil fuels without carbon capture. So ammonia is really a double whammy. It gets you on the front end making the hydrogen to make it from the nitrogen in the air. And then it gets you on the back end after you've used the ammonia to make fertilizer, when the microorganisms in the soil generate this nitrous oxide. When we use too much of it, by the way, that's when that happens. And we use too much of it because it's cheap enough, because we don't burden fossil fuels with a carbon tax to make it precious enough to not waste. It's cheap and it makes the yields go up. But Michael had a good point. We own a little farm, and we lease the fields on that farm to our neighbor, who is actually farming for a living. And he does no-till agriculture on those fields, on his fields as well. And he's very judicious about the use of nitrogen fertilizers because they're expensive. And so he does his fertilizer application on the basis of soil analysis. So he doesn't use any more than he needs to.
Yep.
And that's how agriculture could be done. But it's way easier to just kind of dump a lot of nitrogen on the soil if you can afford it and get really great yields and grow a lot of crop. And a lot of farmers do that because it's cheap enough to do that. We have to stop that.
Yep.
But anyway,
not the
where Michael
subject
was
for today.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
where Michael was going, I think, was talking about the fact that a lot of the hydrogen that we make today, we use in ways that we could be smarter about, and we won't need to use in future, especially if we don't burn fossils as fuels anymore. 55% of it being used in refineries, that's mostly to desulfurize stuff before we burn it so that we don't kill ourselves with the effluent. So we won't need to do that if we just stop burning fossils as fuels. We won't need that hydrogen anymore. So there's that problem solved.
So let's just talk about why this is so relevant. I'm just going to share my screen again here. Oh, look, European and Canadian hydrogen roadmaps, strategies, investments, industrial alliances, lobbying, and a lot of that is the fossil fuel industry attempting to present the fantasy that a hydrogen economy is the future. And that means hydrogen for home heating, hydrogen for cooking, hydrogen for industrial heat, hydrogen for transportation. What they're asserting is that the growth of hydrogen will be massive, and that the only way to fulfill that growth of hydrogen is with steam reformation of natural gas, or gasification of coal with carbon capture, so-called blue hydrogen. There's an entire rainbow of colors, and being colorblind, I'm probably going to get this right, or probably get this wrong, but there's black hydrogen and gray hydrogen, which are both black hydrogen because they're from coal or natural gas without carbon capture, right? So there's, if you make hydrogen from natural gas, you get 8 to 12 times the mass of CO2 as the hydrogen you create. So you get a ton of hydrogen, get 8 to 12 tons of CO2. And from coal, if you make hydrogen from coal, you get 18 to 20 times the mass. So 1 ton of hydrogen, 18 to 20 tons of CO2. I'll make this
recent project in Australia. They're using brown coal, lignite, 33 tons of CO2 per ton of hydrogen. And they think that's a good thing. They're going to one day bury that CO2 one day when someone pays them to.
Let's make this really clear, though. A kilogram of hydrogen has the same energy as a gallon of gasoline, 4.5 liters of gasoline. So in theory, there's the same energy in it. Now, a hydrogen fuel cell car is more efficient than a gasoline internal combustion car, so it can go farther. But the point is, if you burn a gallon of gasoline in a car, you get about the mass equivalent 9 times the mass of CO2. If you burn a kilogram of hydrogen in a car made from natural gas, you get 8 to 10 kilograms of CO2. If you burn hydrogen, a kilogram of hydrogen in a car, so a gallon of gasoline equivalent, you get that's made from coal, you get 18 to 20 times the mass of CO2. So the theory is they're going to capture this at source and put it somewhere. But Meta, you and I talked about carbon capture and sequestration a few weeks ago. I talked to you about the sheer absurd scale problem of carbon capture and the fact that we have nowhere to put it, and that it's a rounding error on top of these things. We're not going to return to carbon capture. That's a well-beaten horse, but the entire fossil fuel industry and most of these hydrogen roadmaps depend upon natural gas or coal turned into hydrogen, the CO2 captured and sequestered, which is a failed model.
Even worse than that. What they're doing is they're selling the potential future of making hydrogen from electricity and water as bait in order to really sell you this future of making hydrogen from natural gas, and instead of venting the CO2 that like we do now, because nobody's paying you to bury it, get the government to pay them to bury it. That's what it's about. So the way we put it is that the whole hydrogen thing is a bait and switch scam. The idea is that you sell the idea of green hydrogen in the future, which is so utterly uneconomic that it does not make sense, as a way to really sell this quote unquote blue hydrogen as a replacement in a way that allows the fossil fuel industry to continue to have a presence in the energy industry in a decarbonized future. Oh, so it's really unfortunate.
There's one actually extra piece of this. They aren't going to spend their own money to do this.
Correct.
They're going to spend your taxpayers' money.
That's right.
Okay, guys, you've got to help me. Now, I'm a slow one on this sort of thing. I've got black. Now there's blue and there's green.
Yep.
And is there any such thing as good hydrogen? In other words,
yeah, absolutely. Green hydrogen.
Green hydrogen.
Take renewable electricity. You put it into a PEM cell, a proton exchange membrane cell. You add water, and water has H2O. That's hydrogen, two of them, and an oxygen. And so the PEM cell splits them apart, and you get two molecules of hydrogen, or two atoms of hydrogen, H2, and then you've got renewable low carbon electricity and water turning into hydrogen. That's a very virtuous source of hydrogen. It's also a tiny minuscule fraction of the amount of hydrogen that's used, and it's expensive to create. And what we have to do is apply it to the places where hydrogen isn't going away.
That's right. That's how we've got to make our ammonia in the future.
Yeah,
but right now,
there's a couple other growth areas.
Now, you don't see any way of getting this to be economically good, cheap enough to be in the game as far as a fuel is concerned.
No, actually, I do. Paul and I have a disagreement on this, a certain amount of disagreement, which is a great thing I wanted to explore in this call. So let's talk about the economics.
No, but don't go past me, because I'm real slow on this.
Same way.
Make sure I understand what the difference. Now, blue is what and green is what, because it didn't quite sink in. Blue hydrogen is what?
So black is hydrogen from fossil fuels without carbon capture. Blue is hydrogen from fossil fuels with carbon capture. Green is hydrogen from renewable electricity and water.
Yeah, the colors of euphemism are, I see your frustration there, Meta. This is all euphemism that's being used to just, cover over the facts. The facts of the matter are that hydrogen is derived from fossil fuels without carbon capture right now, almost exclusively. And it's not used as a fuel as a consequence, because if you think of a unit of energy, a joule or a kilowatt hour or BTU, whatever your favorite unit is, for every unit of energy in hydrogen, there's 30% more carbon emissions from that joule made from fossil fuel than there was if you just burned the fossil fuel to make that joule in the first place. 30% bare minimum. It's worse than burning fossil fuels unless you capture the carbon.
I think what I'm hung up on is this, that tell me if I'm reporting right, that I've heard people say using hydrogen as a fuel is probably not on. Using it for storage is, but what is storage if not reconverting it by being used as a fuel into electricity or something else? So just help me with basic confusion.
Let me share another slide here, which I think will be useful for us to talk about, and we can talk about, is it that one? That one, yes. So here's kind of an European organization's assessment of the use cases for hydrogen that make sense and that don't make sense. So you start off with green, A's at the top, stuff that is proven and in existence and of value. There's an argument we can make in there. But then you get down to the G's, And these are places where it's unproven, doesn't work, needs lots of investment, and probably isn't going to fly. And then there's some stuff in the middle. And Paul and I have some, not disagreements, but we have some nuanced conversations about where the line gets drawn. So A, fertilizer. Hey, guess what? Yeah.
Totally
B,
agree.
Yep, methanol we manufacture. As a matter of fact, I've been in the head offices of Methanex in British Columbia. It turns out to be the 800-pound gorilla for methanol production globally. Who knew? And so we make a useful fossil fuel derivative called methanol that's used for a wide variety of purposes. May or may not continue. I haven't really looked at the future of methanol in a low carbon future. Olefins, hydrocracking, desulfurization is that use in hydrocracking, I think, and desulfurization are both the petroleum industry usage.
They are. Yeah.
Yep.
And olefins actually is a source of, when you make olefins, you make hydrogen. So it's kind of a strange thing for them to have on that list.
Yeah.
And the food industry hydrogenating vegetable oil to make margarine and stuff like that, I guess.
Yep.
But absolutely the list there is replacing all that black hydrogen that we're using right now and replacing that with green. Absolutely necessary, good thing. Only problem is it's expensive. So we have to do it judiciously.
And to be clear, olefins, hydrocracking, and desulfurization mostly go away. Methanol I haven't looked at, so I don't have an opinion. Paul,
Well, the olefins are used in chemicals and materials. So we'll keep making olefins, but we'll make hydrogen when we make them. So,
but it's a diminished amount of it as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's the point is right now, 80%, rough numbers, 80% of every barrel of petroleum pumped anywhere in the world, we burn for fuel.
Yep.
So 20% is used for useful stuff that's mostly going to persist, although some of it will be replaced by mechanisms because it's still expensive environmentally to extract and transform oil. So we should be looking for industrial processes that displace those where possible. But that's the thing. But then there's some interesting stuff in there, like down at the bottom, Meta, G, H2FC cars. That's hydrogen fuel cell cars. So hydrogen fuel cell cars, that's dead tech. That's dead tech rolling. We've known that for a long time. In 2000,
Really?
the year 2000, it was possible to consider that hydrogen cars might be more suitable than battery electric cars, given what most people understood about the two drivetrains and opportunities at the time. By 2010, that ship had sailed. It was clear that battery electric vehicles would be fit for purpose, that batteries, lithium-ion batteries especially, were plummeting in price, increasing in density while they plummeted in price, and that the problems of small-scale hydrogen storage and as a drivetrain for small vehicles were extraordinarily more complicated than most people had ever considered. It seems like it should be easy, and it's not. Paul knows this intimately.
Oh yeah. No, it's an expensive. Hydrogen is an expensive fuel anytime you use it as a fuel. But hydrogen's big problem is that if you look at gasoline as an example, gasoline is inefficient to use as a fuel in an engine because only about 25% of the energy in the gasoline ends up moving the wheels of the car. 75% of it goes away as heat. And in fact, it's even lower than that because about 20% of the energy in the petroleum ends up getting wasted in the refinery before you get the gasoline. So it's not very efficient, but it's really effective, right? I mean, it's a liquid. You can just pour it into a tank, and a small tank holds a lot of energy. You can drive a long way on that. So gasoline is an example of where we do something that's really inefficient because it's so effective. The problem with hydrogen as a fuel is that it's neither efficient nor effective. And in a vehicle, we have something that's much, much more efficient and adequately effective, and that's the electric vehicle. And the thing that changed between the late 1990s, when I was really active in trying to make hydrogen for fueling vehicles, and then later for combined heat and power in houses, the thing that's changed is the invention of a lithium-ion battery.
Briefly, all of us who have spent a long time in this space had our periods of enthusiasm for hydrogen as a solution, which is why we know it isn't for most of these things.
Because nothing's changed about hydrogen. There hasn't been an equivalent invention to the lithium-ion battery with respect to hydrogen. I mean, the proton exchange membrane fuel cell that Michael was talking about before, that was invented in the 1960s, and it was used in the space program. And we've known about fuel cells since the 1850s.
We've made them better now.
Yeah, they're better, absolutely. And they'll continue to get cheaper, and all that stuff is true. The trouble is that hydrogen's neither efficient nor effective. And the reason that it's neither efficient nor effective is thermodynamics, which we can't change, and the properties of the hydrogen molecule, which we can't change. So we can't invent our way out of this one. It's just fundamentally a leaky bucket in which to store energy. And transport uses, I mean, I'm convinced that transport uses for hydrogen are really niche cases only, and we're not going to use it for much of anything. We're certainly not going to use it for cars and light trucks. We're not going to use it for jet aircraft, in my opinion.
Yeah, so let's talk about those things, because transportation is a big part of the hype.
Yeah.
Cars we've ruled out. You know, Honda tried to make a hydrogen scooter at one point, believe it or not. You know, it was just like, oh my God. So that's light vehicles. Right now, there's some people that are pushing the idea that heavy trucks that are in heavy duty cycles will be hydrogen fueled, not battery electric. I don't agree.
I don't agree either.
But the reason is because I'm just sitting here looking at heavy duty vehicles that are on the road 16 hours a day in, you know, stop, start. Those are called buses. And those buses, right now we have 430,000 of them on the roads of China, 16,000 on the roads of Shenzhen alone. And China's Beijing doesn't have any heavy duty cycle utility vehicles, garbage trucks, delivery trucks in the downtown core that aren't electric right now. This is a solved problem, and it's not solved with hydrogen. And
Right.
so the people who are pushing this hydrogen myth for wheeled vehicles on roads with hydrogen are missing that it's a solved problem.
I think Toronto has buses that are hydrogen powered, aren't they?
Nope. No, we do not. We have electric buses. We don't have hydrogen buses.
Okay.
We did have hydrogen buses in Whistler, British Columbia. It was a test. It failed. British Columbia is a real hotbed of hydrogen in Canada. Ballard Power, whose name you might remember, Meta, the fuel cell manufacturer that was really the hot stock in 1999, 1998, is a BC-based company. And there's a whole bunch of hydrogen companies out here.
Right, but Toronto doesn't have any hydrogen-powered garbage trucks or buses. We have some natural gas or actually green biogas-fueled garbage trucks here that are run off of the anaerobic digestion of our green bin waste. But that's a different matter.
So,
we're agreeing violently, Michael and I. Transport uses for wheeled vehicles, forget it. Hydrogen's a dead end.
Here's the next thing, right? So we've gotten rid of light vehicles. We've gotten rid of heavy road vehicles. Let's talk rail. So this is just a European picture of all the different percentage of the rail network in different European countries that are electrified today. When I say electrified, I mean, we hook them up to the electricity grid, and they have electric motors driving the train along. You can see that, you know, like Sweden is not a small country, and it's close to 80% electrified rail. Portugal is over 60%. There's hydrogen fanboys, advocates, frequently point at a recent 60-kilometer stretch of hydrogen passenger train in Germany as this amazing reason why hydrogen will take over rail. But I look at this, and I also look at the 38,000 kilometers, that's 24,000 miles of high-speed electrified rail in China alone. High-speed electrified rail, it's enough to go around the equator. You know,
a dumb question. Where do they keep it? I mean, it can't be in batteries.
Hydrogen?
No, electricity on a train.
Well, two things. Most of the electricity, if you've seen, let's just take Meta. You must see the Spadina streetcar or the King streetcar.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I haven't looked at them, but yeah, they're there.
right? And they have things that come up to and they run along
Yeah.
wires overhead.
You mean across country, they do that same thing all over Europe now?
They do. Yeah,
Yep.
they do. And they have done for a long time.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
like subways. It's like subways have a third rail because subways are in a protected area where people can't get into. The electricity comes up from between the rails, and they just run a brush along the rail. And then for other things, one of my clients happened to be Canadian National Railway, and so I spent some time clambering over a diesel electric freight engine. And a diesel electric freight engine is exactly what it sounds. It's a diesel generator with electric motors on the wheels. And the electric motors to brake, they actually use something like regenerative braking, except they call it dynamic braking because they don't reuse the electricity. They pump it out the roof through heating coils, which is why you'll never see a diesel electric freight train with snow on the roof because it just melts off. The point there, though, Meta, is that all that dynamic braking, these trains, the longest one was 4 kilometers long. It's easy to put a couple of cars with batteries behind the freight engine. And it's easy to run regenerative braking to recharge those every time they break. This is not hard tech. This is known, understandable electronic and electricity management and battery management. And it's easy enough to, because I've been in freight rail cars in Montreal as part of, took a 2-day operations course as part of working with my client. It's easy for them to shunt those things off into a siding and plug them in and leave them there for 6 hours and shunt another 2 cars of batteries out and plug them in the train to keep going.
Exactly.
So for the areas that are hard to, the areas where there aren't overhead wires driving electricity can be bridged with battery power. And while the train is on battery power in electrified corridors, most European high density population areas have fully electrified the freight corridors through cities and stuff like that. So,
and we in Canada are just
let me
laggards.
see if I got you. When you say, I mean, did I understand you? When they put the brakes on, it creates energy or something, and they capture some of that energy to use as electricity.
So right now,
did I hear that?
In electric cars, there's something called regenerative braking.
Yeah.
An electric motor is really simple. If you turn it backwards in the absence of electricity, it generates electricity. And so that's
every
regenerative braking.
Every motor is also an alternator or a generator. It just depends on which way you line it up. And so when you have an electric car or an electric train, same deal. When you put on the brakes, you're not actually putting on the brakes. You're actually just telling the motor to act as an alternator and put electricity back into the battery. And that gives you in a car about a 15% increase in how far you can drive on a battery full of electricity. But it also reduces how much wear and tear there are on the brakes. And on a freight train, that's a huge deal. It's a big thing. But the thing is, running overhead wires are expensive and maintaining them is expensive. So of course the railroads don't want to do it if fuel's cheap enough and we can dump stuff into the atmosphere for free. You just keep buying fuel and that's the way that you run it. But if you look at, as an example, GO Transit here in Toronto, carrying passengers from the suburbs into downtown and back home again in the evening, they don't want to run the overhead wires because they think it's too expensive and it'll interfere with the freight traffic that also has to use those lines, and those freight trains are all diesels right now. So what they did instead, and this goes back to what I was saying before about the bait and switch scam, the GO Transit people, Metrolinx, did a clever thing. They delayed the project, and hence their need to spend any money doing anything with GO Transit electrification, by studying hydrogen as an alternative. So they spent 4 years and $7 million to conclude that hydrogen wasn't a good option for the GO trains. And that accomplished their real objective, which was to not do anything for 4 years.
Okay, here we have my assistant, Adam Wynn, coming on because, Adam, unmute yourself. He's watching in case one of the viewers has a question.
Hello, one of the viewers, hi, I'm Meta's assistant, my name is Adam. One of our viewers, Lorraine Hussey, is asking, Can she get clarification? Hydrogen for anything is entirely dependent on our continuing exploitation of fossil fuels. Is that correct? And if so, is that rational?
No, it's not correct.
You take
It's
this one,
not
Paul.
correct. Yeah, I'll take it. I'll bat on this
Smash
one.
it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's hydrogen for use as a chemical. Okay, and that's the example that we gave was ammonia. Right now we make that from fossils, but we don't need to. Tomorrow, if we wanted to, we could start making ammonia. Now it would cost a lot of money. We'd have to invest a lot of money, and we'd have to pay a lot more for our food because we'd have to pay a lot more for the ammonia and the fertilizer to grow that food. But we could do it. There's no inventions needed. We could absolutely switch over to using electricity and water to make that hydrogen instead of using natural gas. Okay. But the thing that's in question is hydrogen as a fuel. Okay, whether that's hydrogen as a fuel for transport, hydrogen as a fuel for heating, hydrogen as a way to store electricity for use later, that Meta was talking about before, that a lot of people seem to find exciting. Those things are all suspicious. And the reason they're suspicious is that we don't do them at all now. And the reason we don't do them at all now is that they're too expensive. And the reason that we make all of our hydrogen right now from fossils is that it's cheap because we can dump stuff to the atmosphere nearly for free. So that makes it artificially cheap. Take away that advantage, and all of a sudden we can start talking about decarbonizing the future.
And I will add some glosses to that. Green hydrogen for the sources, for the things we must continue to use hydrogen for, ammonia-based fertilizers, absolutely essential.
Yep.
So that's job number one. But as we said, the amount of ammonia-based fertilizer we require should diminish. We produce more calories per person than we can possibly consume. We waste food today. We just don't distribute it well. As we move to low tillage agriculture, which is one of the key biological methods for long-term carbon sequestration to draw down atmospheric carbon, that also reduces our use of ammonia-based fertilizers. The 55% of hydrogen that's used in petroleum refineries mostly goes away. So that's another diminishing market, not entirely. But then we get into the cases where we might see some opportunities. And Lorraine, this is a place where we're going to get to next is, what are the potential extension points where green hydrogen might be able to decarbonize things which aren't decarbonized today? And, you know, I've talked to Mark Z. Jacobson, the Stanford professor, and whose team does the 100% renewables for 143 countries stuff about this. And Paul and I have internet talked about this, but we've never talked in person. And Paul's much more of an expert on hydrogen than I am. So, you know, let's talk about those extension points. So the first extension point is steel making.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with the simple gloss. In North America, we get 70 to 80% of our steel from electric mini mills. What those are is electricity running into electric arc heaters that generate 1,500 to 3,000 degrees Celsius heat, which melts scrap metal and turns it into new steel. Because we have a lot of scrap metal, we can do that. In other parts of the world, like China, where they're making a lot more steel, right now they use metallurgical coal with iron ore as a part of the process to create new steel. And that metallurgical coal plus the heat in the process means that steel is very high carbon when used that way. We can decarbonize electric mini mills virtually completely. We can't decarbonize steel made from coal. And so this is a place where hydrogen reduction of iron ore can displace an awful lot of that. Paul, do you want to talk just a bit about that one?
Absolutely.
You actually know the chemistry.
Yeah, the mistake that people make though is they kind of got a kind of a what I call a burner box on their head, right? So people that don't really understand what's going on and just think of the energy problem as getting rid of fossil fuels, which is, you know, fairly accurate, but not quite the whole picture. Get it in their head that what we really need to do is we need to take one thing that we're burning, fossil fuels, and replace them with something else that we can burn, because that seems logical and obvious, right? We can't burn fossils anymore. And, you know, let's burn something else. What can we burn? Hydrogen. Okay, problem solved. Well, you don't do that in iron reduction, which is really what we're not talking about steel making, we're talking about iron reduction. So when you take iron ore, which is iron oxide, and you reduce the iron oxide to iron metal, that process right now is done in blast furnaces that use coal coke. And we can replace the reducing agent, the thing that actually takes the iron oxide and makes it into iron metal, with hydrogen. We can do that. That's a good use for hydrogen, and a use where it makes sense in the future. But what we won't do is we won't use hydrogen to make heat. So we won't be burning hydrogen inside a blast furnace. I mean, a blast furnace just simply will not work if you try to replace all the coal or the coal coke with hydrogen. That's just a foolish idea. What you do instead is you design a different kind of furnace, and in that furnace you carry out the high temperature reaction between hydrogen and iron oxide to make iron metal, and that reaction actually consumes a bit of heat. So you need heat from somewhere else to drive it. You make that heat with electricity, just like you do in the mini mills, the arc mills.
Yeah, now let's actually talk about that, because this is one of the big things. The only source of high value, high quality heat is fossil fuels. And that's a BS statement.
It's dead wrong. Yeah.
It's dead wrong. And I'm just going to say, Paul, what do you do for a living, and where do you get your heat from?
Thank you. You teed me up nicely there, because I've made this point in an article that Michael's obviously read. So what I do for a living, I actually design pilot plants for the chemical process industry. So what a pilot plant is it's the prototype of a new chemical process that helps you get the data to take a process from the laboratory and, small equipment and flasks and stuff like that, and produce a big plant that'll make, tonnage quantities of whatever material, chemical or fuel or whatever it is that we're talking about. So I build these little pilot plants that are in the middle. And in those pilot plants, we don't burn anything. The reason people burn stuff to make heat is that it's cheaper than using electricity, not because it's better or easier than using electricity, it's because it's cheaper. And the reason that it's cheaper to make heat by burning stuff is that right now we still make a lot of our electricity by burning stuff. So if you think about it in a very simple chain, right? Let's say today, we have a natural gas plant running, and the natural gas plant is burning natural gas to make electricity. And then we transform that electricity and bring it over to our house. And then we plug in an electric heater and we turn the electricity back into heat. We're really kind of committing a sin against thermodynamics. We're taking energy and transforming it a couple different times, and we're turning it back into heat and wasting a lot in the process. So that's dumb, and dumb means expensive. Okay, it's chemically a bad thing, and dumb means expensive. But in the future we're all talking about, when we can't burn fossils as fuels anymore, we're going to be starting with electricity. We're going to be making electricity with wind and solar, storing some of it in batteries, transferring it to one to another across high voltage DC lines, and so on. And that electricity is what we're starting with. So we can either use that electricity to make heat with 100% efficiency. I mean, literally 100% efficiency. Or if we want low temperature heat, like to heat our house, we can do it with basically 300 or even 600% efficiency by using the electricity to run a heat pump, which pumps heat from somewhere else. And that gives us, by 600% efficiency, I mean a ground source heat pump, for every kilowatt hour of electricity you put in, you get 6 kilowatt hours worth of heat pumped into your house from the ground. It's pretty amazing, right?
And so in industrial processes as well, in any industrial plant, there are exothermic, things that make heat, and things that suck heat.
That's right.
And you can actually just couple them and use a heat pump to move the heat from the thing that's making heat to the thing that needs heat.
That's right.
Highly efficient.
In our chemical pilot plants, because our pilot plants, their purpose is actually to get information, right? In order to get to take the risk out of building these big projects that cost billions of dollars, and make sure that they actually work and will make money for the people that build them. We don't use fire to heat things because it's inefficient in the sense of getting data. It's hard. You know, you need air permits. You make emissions that you have to then report, and maybe you have to do processes to clean up that stuff that you just burned before you emit it to the atmosphere. Whereas if you use electricity, yeah, it costs a little bit more, but it works really well and you can control it really well. So we don't use fire in our pilot plants, and we do every process that the chemical process industry does that they do using fire. We do it all with electricity already. So I know you can do it, and because I do it for a living. And there's the thing, there's a lot of people that don't do what I do for a living, and they can't see their way around it. They think, oh, anytime that there's high temperature heat, you must have to burn something to make that heat. There are a few instances where you have to, okay? And one instance is probably next on Michael's list, it's cement making, okay? So cement making.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Yeah. And you and I can talk about that some more. So the conventional way that we make cement,
but it's not hydrogen.
That's
so
correct,
let's get back to hydrogen, because
right. But the point being that there are some processes in industry where you have to make heat, and you have to make heat inside a box of fire bricks, because getting the heat to come in from the outside is just not possible. So you have to have a flame inside something, or you have to put the energy inside the equipment. And that's where a fuel, and it doesn't have to be hydrogen, but hydrogen's one option, can come in handy. But those are, there are some big users like cement where that's a possibility, and there are other possibilities too. But those are kind of edge cases. They're not common.
So you're
The most
suggesting
common,
that for cement making, they use hydrogen instead of whatever is gasoline or whatever they're using?
well, they use natural gas and coal right now. But the thing about cement making, it's also interesting. People assume that because cement making makes a whole lot of CO2, that it must come from the fuel that they use. About half of the CO2 that comes out of cement making comes from the fact that you have to make cement. So when you make cement, what you do is you take a rock that's got carbon dioxide in it, a carbonate rock, and you cook it and turn it into an oxide rock, okay, or a silicate rock, and you drive off the CO2 that used to be on the rock. And over the next 100 years, about half to 3/4 of that CO2 goes back into the cement that you made. So it's just a matter of waiting long enough and you get it back. But the problem is you end up with CO2 in the atmosphere for 100 years, and that's bad. So there are better ways to do it. There's better cements that you can use and better ways to make cement.
But let's get back to finishing off the hydrogen thing. So we've covered ground transportation.
We have.
There is no model of the universe where hydrogen has more than the tiniest niche in ground transportation.
That's right.
That's just done and dusted. Then there's water-based transportation and aviation-based transportation. And there's, my assertion is that for short and medium haul aviation and shipping, so this is lake shipping and regional air and commuter air, like from Vancouver to Victoria,
Ferries.
all that stuff, all that's going to be battery electric. We have a lot of battery electric ferries already. We have a lot of battery electric short haul freight and container ships already. We have a lot more being delivered. That's a done and dusted thing. The problem is long haul.
That's correct. Yeah,
long haul aviation and long haul shipping. So for example, China to Vancouver, container ship full of Raggedy Ann dolls and Nintendos, or me flying to Singapore, as I did a bunch of times because I lived in Singapore, and that's long haul. And so what do you do about those? The energy requirements of that long in a trip, isolated from refueling infrastructure, is enormous. And this is a place where we don't have right now a viable alternative to fossil fuels. And they're some of the most polluting aspects of fossil fuels. Heavy freight shipping uses heavy fuel oil, frequently referred to as bunker oil, which is kind of like a lower grade of diesel. So it's even more polluting, and it's got massive amounts of carbon, CO2 emissions, and it's got black carbon emissions, which actually have very, very high warming potentials as well. And it's mostly in the ocean outside of international waters. So it's hard to count. It's not counted in the country where they start or in the country where they end. It's a problem. It's a big source of variety of types of pollutions. Aviation has got different things. We talked about nitrous oxides in the upper atmosphere, long life, persistent, high greenhouse gas, global warming potential gases, as well as the CO2 in the stratosphere, as well as contrails, which have a warming effect. You know, blah, blah, blah. So what do we do about those? Mark Z. Jacobson, when I speak to him, says, and I agree, hydrogen has not been proven. I'm in the middle between Paul and Mark said Jacobson. Mark said, with what he knows, and his team thinks hydrogen fuel processes will be powering those things. I think that's probably true. I think it's more likely true for shipping than for aviation. What I say is that hydrogen has not proven itself to not be the solution for those 2 points yet. It's 3 to 4% of global petroleum use, according to my calculation. So take that with a grain of salt. But 3 to 4%, hydrogen has a potential to fulfill that. And Paul, take it away. Why do you disagree?
Yeah, I mean, jet aircraft have the problem that they have to push their fuel through the air at high speed. So jet aircraft care not just about how heavy their fuel is, but they care about how big it is, how much space it takes up. And so hydrogen wins on the weight. Okay, a kilogram of hydrogen has much more energy in it than a kilogram of kerosene, which is what they use in jets. Basically, jet fuel is more or less kerosene. The trouble with the hydrogen is that it's big. It takes up a lot of space. And the real trouble with it is that it's big even when it's a liquid. And it's only a liquid at 24 degrees above absolute zero. So believe it or not, it's unimaginable that people can get things that cold, 24 degrees above absolute zero, whatever that's minus 250 degrees C.
Let's just go 24 Kelvin.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It's a point when using the Kelvin scale makes sense.
That's right. It's 24 Kelvin, and that's the boiling point. And even then, it's only 75 kilograms in a cubic meter. Gasoline's 850 kilograms in a cubic meter. This stuff is a tenth as dense and a 12th as dense. So it's enormously big. And the problem being an ultra cold liquid, you can't put it in the wings. So you have to put it in the fuselage. You have to put it in the place where the people go. And, so give it up. Hydrogen jet airplanes, you're more likely to see a pig fly by your window in 10 years than a hydrogen fueled jet aircraft. Okay, so hydrogen for jets, forget it. They're going to use biofuels, and the global warming potential is not going to be completely eliminated. And they're going to make some toxic emissions in the atmosphere, but it matters an awful lot less at 30,000 feet than it does at ground. So for jet aircraft, forget about hydrogen, it's a dead end. For ships, oh boy, that's such a hard question. And the reason that ships are such a hard question is that shipping is an international business that's extraordinarily hard to regulate. And they are the very bottom feeders of the global energy transportation energy market. They use the dirtiest fuel that's a liquid that they can buy. They would use coal, except it's a solid, so you need people to shovel it, or machines to shovel it. So it's a nuisance, so they don't like using coal. So they use the next best thing, which is liquid coal, which is basically, it's the stuff that's left over after you distill off all the good stuff from petroleum. They call it residuum. It's the residual stuff that's left behind. And it's full of all the sulfur and the metals and the terrible stuff that's left in the bottom of a petroleum barrel. And that's, until this year, that's what they were burning in those container ships. So one of these container ships was responsible for an enormous fraction of the toxic pollution from any kind of vehicle. I think, each ship was equivalent to about 1 million cars in terms of the amount of toxic pollution that it was emitting. Black carbon, sulfur oxides, and nitrogen oxides coming out of burning. Ships are really bad. So they made a rule internationally that whereas in past, you weren't allowed to burn this horrible fuel within 100 miles of land, they made a rule that as of this year, you weren't allowed to burn this stuff anywhere unless you had a scrubber on your ship that could take the toxic pollution away.
Okay, so let's take another question here because we only got a couple minutes left.
Yeah, no worries.
We want to close out after this question, I assume, Meta.
Okay. Adam, ask us what you would like.
So we have another question from Lorraine Hussey, who's watching the show. She's a small farmer.
Hi, Lorraine.
She has fertilizer covered. She would like to know if you can point to any studies on using hydrogen in agriculture apart from fertilizer. Are you saying that hydrogen can be made, are you saying that hydrogen can be of use for large-scale farm equipment through electrification?
So let me take the first cut at that. No, farm equipment will be electrified. It'll be battery electric, and hydrogen has no play there. We're already seeing autonomous battery electric tractors and battery electric tractors for drivers. This is just an extension of the same thing.
Absolutely. I don't see any future for hydrogen in agriculture. You see, the trouble with hydrogen is that even, let's say we magically found a way to make hydrogen much more efficiently than we do now. We won't, because thermodynamics won't allow it, but let's say that we did. The trouble just begins once you've made it. You have to get it where you need it. So you really have only two choices. You can either deliver it somewhere, which means you either need a pipeline, or you need to ship it in a tube trailer truck. And a full tractor trailer can only carry 400 kilograms of the stuff.
Yeah.
So that's not a very practical outcome. It's super expensive and not very practical.
And
who wants to build pipelines? You know, and the big trouble with pipelines is that to move an amount of energy in the form of hydrogen takes 3 times as much energy as to move the same amount of energy as natural gas. So it's this is something that the natural gas industry doesn't want to find something else to do for a living, right? They want to keep selling natural gas. And if they can't sell natural gas in the future because we won't let them emit CO2 and methane into the atmosphere anymore, they want to sell us hydrogen. So they want to pretend that we're going to blend hydrogen into the natural gas network, and eventually we'll be using pure hydrogen in the natural gas network, and that's just fantasy. It's people who want to keep doing something for a living selling you a bill of goods, and don't worry, they've got the invoice in hand. They're ready to give it to you if you buy into it.
Yeah, the last point I'll make before turning it over to Meta to close is a hydrogen refueling station costs about $2.5 million.
Yep. And that doesn't fuel very many cars.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
You mean for a car or something?
For a car or a piece of farm equipment.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so you're not going to have one of those on. You're not going to have one of those on every farm. Forget it.
Yeah. How much do these things cost where you can get your electric car juiced up?
$250 to $5,000.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I use a landscaping outlet to charge my electric car. It costs me nothing.
Yeah.
The electricity costs me $1.
Everybody who's ever plugged a car into a block heater, wherever you did that anywhere in Canada, you've done what is necessary to fuel an electric car for all your travel for an entire day.
I drove I converted a little electric car, a little British sports car to an electric car, and I drove it 16,000 miles to work and back between Burlington and Toronto. And that's how I charged it. I charged it with a landscaping outlet at work and a landscaping outlet at home. And I never ran out of juice. And the only time I had to go to a gas station is if I wanted a cup of coffee. It was great.
Okay, Meta, close it up.
Well, all I can do is say thank you. I feel much smarter, but I actually am going to have to watch this thing about 4 times to make sure it sinks in, because I wasn't built for this kind of thinking, and it's a hard lift for me. But it is really important enough so that I think it's worth it. And I'm really grateful to you guys, and I hope that I hope the guys making the policies on these things pay attention to what you're saying. That's the point, because you have advice that I'm not sure the people who talk policy are paying attention to, are they?
The way I would describe it is there are highly paid lobbyists who have access to political offices who make it their job to overwhelm messages like Paul and I's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're kind of swimming upstream kind of hard. But if you look on Clean Technica, you'll find lots of Michael's articles where he takes apart these ideas piece by piece and puts them back together again in a way that makes sense. And mine are mostly on LinkedIn.
Thank you, fellas. It's been really, I'd say fun, but hard work for me, and probably for some of our viewers too. But I urge everybody to give it a try. Okay, bye. See ya.
Thank you again, Meta.
Thanks.
Pleased to meet you, Paul.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Nice to speak to you in person.